How did you end up in venture? Obviously, immigrant, female. I think female representation in venture in general is pretty low. And I think someone with your backgrounds, the chances of getting into venture is probably even lower. So tell us about your journey.
Yeah, so I went to NYU for undergrad business school. So I was at NYU Stern, which for those of you who are not familiar, is apparently a huge banking and consulting funnel. I don't think you can make it more than 2 steps onto the campus, which is really just a bunch of buildings in Greenwich Village, without kind of bumping into a recruiter from Goldman or PwC or one of the other sort of more established corporate banking and consulting firms. So, a huge emphasis on that. If you weren't really poking your head up, you honestly could go through your entire 4 years there and not know there are any other jobs other than banking and consulting. But I actually ended up there because I knew I wanted to stay in a big city where there's a lot of dynamic things going on. You can work, you can intern, and I basically worked my whole way through college. And I was interested in undergrad business programs because I was always inclined towards small businesses, entrepreneurship, new business creation, and things like that. And so I actually thought like this is where you learn how to run a business. So a little bit of a happy accident, or at the beginning an unhappy accident, that I ended up there, and I started looking for ways to get more involved in the entrepreneurial scene. And I actually ended up getting into the venture space when I was studying abroad in Prague. It's a very roundabout way, and just kind of a weird coincidence, because I'm from the Central Eastern European region to begin with, spent my whole life in New York, and then ended up in venture capital close to home.
Oh,
But
wow.
not because I'm from there, just kind of roundabout. So I started interning at a fund called Captial Ventures in Prague. Then I spent a little bit of time at a seed fund in Sofia in Bulgaria called Launch Hub Ventures. And that was the beginning of it. And, this was back in 2014 when, particularly in Central Eastern Europe, but also on the East Coast in the US, venture capital wasn't really that popular yet. You had some of the classic institutions that are now extremely well known, like USB, FirstMark, et cetera. But it wasn't sort of like a hot thing to recruit for on campus. Everyone who I talked to at school was like, you want to be a venture capitalist? What is that? So on the one hand, the competition wasn't as fierce as it is now. On the other hand, it was much more opaque. So you didn't know about any open roles. There weren't that many funds. So it was tricky. One of the things that was very interesting for me getting into it, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, is that it was a great entry point for me to start to see areas where I could actually be valuable to founders, even though I was so early in my career. The vast majority of the founders I was meeting at that time were super technical, had been heads down for 2 years building something, had never spoken to a prospective customer, and you would meet with them and their questions would be, so we built this thing. Do you have any ideas on, who we might be able to sell to? And it was just interesting to sort of be able to bring that more business side to those conversations and, effectively get some validation and some encouragement pretty early on that, okay, there actually is a role for me to play here, even though when you look at kind of my resume on paper, it wouldn't automatically think that there's really a logical role in venture for someone with my background.
While you were at, I guess, NYU Stern, by the way, go Stern, also from Stern for my master's.
The master's program sounds more fun, by the way.
They are fun. I actually get a lot of good exposure. While you were at NYU, did you seek out the venture space, or just kind of, I don't know, the universe kind of naturally led you to that? Like, were you involved with, there's a lot of PE. Well, back when you went, it was probably more PE than VC. Like, were there clubs and stuff you were involved in that kind of give you exposure?
There were a couple of things. One is the Entrepreneurial Exchange Group was a student-run organization that was more focused on, as you can tell, entrepreneurship and startups. There was Tech at NYU, which I was sort of aware of, but not actually that closely involved with. And then the venture capital internship in Prague that I got was actually based on the recommendation of a friend of mine who I had met through a student-run organization called the Undergrad Stern Women in Business Club, USWIB. It's a bit of a mouthful. But that was sort of like the university connection there. It was someone I met through USWIB who said, hey, when I was in Prague last year, I was at this VC firm, you might find it interesting. There was another organization called the Strategic Venture Society, which is basically, it has now become the VC club. I started when I was in my senior year. So for those first kind of 3 years of me finding my way, it didn't exist. Other things that I'll highlight on NYU, though, that were very relevant that I did eventually get involved with are the Entrepreneurial Institute. So there's the Leslie E-Lab, which houses all sorts of programs for student entrepreneurs. They have things like mini accelerator programs, mentor meetings, pitch competitions, pretty much everything you can imagine. So I did actually reach out to NYU's executive director of the Entrepreneurial Institute, Frank Rimolofsky, who's just a fantastic person and a truly wonderful resource for the New York City tech ecosystem. Met up with him, had a meeting with him at the E-Lab and was like, Frank, I can't believe I didn't know about this until just now. This is maybe halfway through my junior year. And he goes, well, we didn't open this lab until last year. I'm like, okay, fair. It did not exist for my first 2 years here. But it definitely feels like there's a shift that happened sometime between 2014 and 2018 in terms of the critical mass of entrepreneurial and VC interest at NYU. And so I kind of caught the tail end of that. And it seems like for everyone who's sort of in that ecosystem now, there's a lot of opportunities to get involved.